Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rendezvous Reimagined 2020. My name is Tracy Bazo. My pronouns are she and her, and I would like to welcome you to my presentation on mental health and faith today. So, I am coming to you not only from the perspective of a young adult who has suffered suffered and dealt with mental illness for many, many years of my life. But I'm coming to you from the perspective of a social service worker and from the perspective of someone who is finishing off my double bachelor's degree in both honors social work and religion and theology. I am also here presenting to you on behalf of the Mental Health and Wellness Committee from the United Church of Canada head office. And our goal there is to really bring mental health and wellness education to everyone across Canada that is part of the United Church of Canada and all faith communities, and get the conversation started about what mental health is and not have mental health be a taboo subject in our congregations any longer, and bring mental health out into the forefront and have more of our ministers and ministry personnel trained and educated on the topic of mental health and faith. So let's get started today. Everyday mental health. So, a quick definition of mental health as defined by the World Health Organization is the capacity of each of us to feel, think, and act in ways that enhance our ability to enjoy life and deal with the challenges we face. It is important to remember that this also includes a positive set of emotional and spiritual well being in respects to both our cultural and personal identity. As people of faith ourselves, this emotional well-being and spiritual well-being plays a huge part in our mental health and well-being. For those who identify in the LGBTQ2S plus communities, that can have a huge impact on their mental health and whether they are accepted into faith communities or accepted into their families or their community at large as well. For those who are part of the Indigenous or Inuit or Aboriginal communities, this also plays a large role on their mental health as it is part of their cultural identity. As many of us are colonizers to this land, it is important that we remember that our Western ways of thinking about mental health and wellness and how we approach mental health and wellness may be different than how those in the Aboriginal, Inuit, Métis approach mental health and wellness. The long and short of it all, though, is that every single one of us has mental health. If you're someone who grew up thinking that you did not have mental health, I apologize if I'm bursting your bubble, but you do have mental health as well. Mental health is the same as physical health. Every single person on this planet has mental health. So, this is the mental health continuum. Some other professionals that I work with call it the mental health compass. I prefer continuum though, and I'm going to kind of explain why I prefer the word continuum. So, we have these kind of four bolded text here, and they start from the right. It says no mental illness symptoms, and then on the left, you have serious mental illness. I just want to start off by saying that I don't want you to jump to the conclusion that when it says serious mental illness, it automatically refers to things that have like a serious, large impact on our lives, like schizoaffective disorder or psychopathic disorders, or anything major like that that can happen in a person's life. This can be anything ranging from anxiety to seasonal depression to panic disorders, anything along those lines will be in the category of serious mental illness because it has a serious impact on a person's life. At the top part of this continuum, we have the optimal mental health, and at the bottom of it, we have poor mental health. So, in the top right hand corner here, this would be the ideal world if we had never fallen into sin, if we were living in heaven, or if Jesus were to come back today and we were living in a utopia where there was no mental illness ever in our world, there was no sin in our world, and we were all living in optimal mental health without mental illness 24/7, 365 days a year. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Unfortunately, we don't live in that kind of world or society, and there are going to be days where tragedy does come into our lives and sin does fall into our lives, or mistakes happen. And we're going to fall into this latter category of days where we have poor mental health, without mental illness for some people, and you're going to fluctuate. Now, this fluctuation or continuum of your mental health spectrum can happen within a day, it can happen within an hour. You can go in and out of here. It can happen over the span of your lifetime, and it will happen over the span of your lifetime. And that is completely normal. It is normal for humans to have emotions, and it is normal for those emotions to fluctuate and change over time. On the other hand of the spectrum or this continuum, we have people who are going to be diagnosed with mental illness. So, right now, for myself, I know for sure I am in this top left hand corner where I am functioning with optimal mental health with mental illness. Many people have this thought that people who are diagnosed with mental illnesses will never be able to function with optimal mental health, and that is simply not true. People that are diagnosed with mental health do have good mental health days. They do have times where they can function with optimal mental health, and this can go on for days at a time. It doesn't have to be just one day or a short period of time. This whole last couple days with Rendezvous has been a wonderful time period for me, and I've been able to function at that optimal mental health for a long time over the last couple days because I've been able to connect with many people. I've been able to praise and worship God with all of you virtually. Together, so we may not be together in person, but we're together in spirit and in song, and that has just been wonderful for my mental health, and I'm hoping for all of your mental and emotional and spiritual health as well. But there also is times where I do have times of poor mental health with my mental illness, and that's perfectly okay too. It's all about learning how to cope and focus and deal with those times in our lives where we can openly admit and say, you know what, I am struggling right now. I am dealing with some really hard emotions in my life right now due to my mental illness. So, one thing that I would like to point out is that because this is a continuum, it means that we can fluctuate in between these stages in this continuum at any point of our life. Just because you're 50 years old and you've never been diagnosed with a mental illness doesn't mean that you can't be diagnosed with a mental illness after a tragic event happens in your life or a large event happens in your life. You could still be diagnosed at some point in your life with mental illness. There are large events in our life that can cause these things. Sometimes it can be someone has been diagnosed with an illness, such as cancer, that can cause things like depression to happen. It can be sometimes having surgery can cause people to come out with PTSD because there's been trauma that has happened in the surgery. So it's not to say that because you don't have mental illness right now, you won't have it in the future. I know that sounds really glim and it's not meaning to. There are people who will go through their life without ever experiencing mental illness, and that is wonderful. That's, what we're trying to work towards as a future, as a society, with teaching people coping strategies and teaching people to learn to handle and deal with their emotions in a positive, more productive way, and learning to kind of get ahead of the illnesses and emotions and stuff like that that are negative. Um, the only one that I will say that is really, really hard and rare to go back from is once you are diagnosed with a mental illness, you rarely go into the opposite side where you are no longer a person diagnosed with a mental illness. And I don't want you to also take that with negative connotation. Um, so the odd case that this does happen is mostly when children are diagnosed with mental illness because their brains are still in those formative years. So formative years, what I mean by that is before someone is 25. So between 0 and 25, your brain is still growing and developing. Now, this does sometimes change between genders and between depending on how the the processes that people go through when they're growing up, obviously. But the general age for brain development is between 0 and 25. So if someone is experiencing, big struggles in mental health, or is having, some ACEs going on in their life, adverse childhood experiences, um, it's important that we get them that early intervention and early help so that they have the best chance to achieve and overcome those mental health struggles that they are dealing with before the time they become adults. And that's really what our goal is here, to prevent them from having long term effects of mental illness. Now, someone pointed out earlier in our session today, when we were doing this live, that does this mean that they will never be able to stop going to therapy for PTSD? And I don't want that to be your takeaway from this, because that's not it at all. As someone who suffers from PTSD myself, don't let that be your takeaway, because I know the symptoms of, PTSD and depression and stuff like that can be so hard, and even anxiety. All those symptoms that you get with these illnesses can be hard, and you don't want to hear that you'll never get better. And that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm trying to say is when you're going to professional help and you're seeking that professional help, it's there for a reason. And some people may want to continue on with therapy or psychotherapy or talk therapy for the rest of their life. And I think that's perfectly okay too. I personally strongly recommend that everyone see a therapist or a counselor or a social worker, or a professional, a mental health professional of some kind, at least once or twice a year, just to have a good sounding board to get stuff off their chest and have some good professional advice, because sometimes your friends don't always give you the best advice, even though their intentions are good. What this does mean, though, is that you should practice those techniques that you are given in counseling or therapy or whatever kind of advice you are going to, whatever professional techniques you are getting, to use those coping strategies or use those mindfulness strategies and self care strategies to prevent yourself from getting back into that place that you once were. So I know for myself, I do a lot of different mindfulness practices when I know that my stress and anxiety is getting too high, or when my emotions are becoming a little too much. But I also do it throughout my week. I try and do at least one act of self care or mindfulness every single day in order to stay on top of those emotions. And it's taken me a long time to kind of realize that as well. It's only been within the last 3 years since I've been in school for social work that I've really started to be really on top of my self care practices in order to prevent myself from falling back into bad habits. And a lot of us don't really think about that, right? But the reason why therapists and social workers and counselors, they tell you to do these practices, it's not for our benefit, it's not for our help. Um, it's to help you to remember to do them in the future, to prevent you from falling back into those bad habits. You may not always have to do them every day like I do. I do it because of the profession that I'm in, and because I do have to deal with a lot of heavy stories and a lot of heavy emotions from other people telling me their sometimes traumatic events that happen in their life. And I need a way to express those things that I'm hearing sometimes that can be rather hard. So for me, practicing that relaxation techniques every day is really helpful. But it's important to do them at least once or twice a week to kind of keep yourself at that calm so that in the future, maybe, 2 years from now or 5 years from now, something that was once triggering to you is a little less triggering to you because sometimes these emotions can kind of sneak up on you when you least expect it. So it's important to always keep those things in mind because there is going to be times when you can't avoid that thing that once triggered you, or you can't avoid circumstances, or something that once triggered you or is still maybe triggering to you will come up when you weren't expecting it or in a place you weren't expecting it. And it simply can't be avoided. And you need to learn to be able to manage those emotions and manage those feelings that you have, and learn how to go through your day with those triggering emotions or triggering smells, even, or triggering sounds, and learn how to deal with that in a positive manner. And that's okay. Right? Even if you need to go back to the therapist every so often, every other year or every couple years, that's okay too. But that's why we give you these practices when you are meeting with us, is to help you cope on your own. So, mental health challenges. So, mental illness, as most of us hopefully know, can affect anyone of any age, race, gender identity, or religion. Religion does not exempt you from mental illness. Everyone will experience sadness, confusion, frustration, or the feelings of being lost throughout their life. But people with mental illness, that have mental illness, these feelings will affect their mood for an extended periods of time. So what that means is everyone will have these emotions, and these emotions are perfectly normal. Humans are allowed to feel emotions. They are allowed to experience different emotions, and you should feel different emotions throughout your life. If you don't feel certain emotions, that is its own kind of mental health issue, and that should be addressed in its own way too. But it's perfectly normal to feel all these different things, and there should be nothing. It should be noted that there's nothing wrong with you, right? But if you feel any of these things for longer than a 2 week period, that's when you should speak up, and that's when you need to seek help from someone, from a mental health professional. Because feeling, especially sad for a long period of time, or feeling anger for, longer than that 2 week period, um, that's when you need to seek professional help, because that's when we can start talking to you about, okay, let's start, recognizing these, try to start dealing with these so that we don't have to, look into categorizing you with a mental health disorder or a mental illness, because we do want to try and prevent you from getting to that stage of having mental illness the best we can. So anytime after a 2-week period of feeling these emotions, it's important to seek help. And that doesn't just mean negative emotions either. If you're experiencing what we call mania, and what that means is an extreme high of emotions, extreme happiness, and uncontrollable happiness where you just feel like you're on top of the world, you're having trouble sleeping because you're so happy and excited. That's a sign of bipolar disorder. That's the mania side of bipolar disorder as well. And you do want to seek help for that too. So, what's the definition of mental illness? Is when there is an extended disturbance in someone's thoughts, emotions, and behavior that decreases the person's ability to cope with daily stress and challenges in their life, along with the ability to function and carry out their usual personal relationships. With things like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, this can be positive or negative. Personal relationships and how they function in these personal relationships. It could be going really, really well for a couple of weeks and then be really, really negative. It could be, going on a shopping spree for, a couple weeks at a time, all of those kind of things. Same with what used to be called multiple personality disorders, or borderline personality disorder as well. Those can really affect how people interact and carry out their relationships between people. So if people are, kind of switching between personalities, that's obviously going to have a huge effect on people's relationship. But there could be times when people don't always notice that they're switching between personalities, or they're having that, almost like that borderline personality disorder can be really, really hard to kind of notice in some people because it's slight behavior changes, or they're changing who they are based on who they're around, right? Which with teenagers can be really, really hard to spot because a lot of teens will kind of switch their personality based on the friendship group they're with. And that is, normal. That's not atypical. But it's important to kind of notice the bigger behavior changes that um, youth and young adults are having with mental illness. Oops, sorry, wrong way. So these are some brain scans that have been taken over the time about with different mental health concerns, and I want to point out before we go on that all of these scans that are the scan with the brain that has the certain mental health disorder or illness. All of these brains are done without medication and without any kind of intervention. And what I mean by intervention is that could be medication, pharmaceutical, or non-pharmaceutical, which means CBD for those who know what CBD is. And it also means that there is no treatment being offered, whether that be therapy, psychotherapy, mindfulness therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, any of those kind of things. None of those interventions are being offered at this present time with these brains. So that's important to realize too, that there's no treatment being offered on any of these brains that you're seeing. So, in terms of the brains, instead of using the word normal like they use here, I'm going to use average. So, in ADHD, we see that the average brain it looks a lot different. You can see it around the purple, especially here, but also on the inside. You notice the very large difference in color in the brain, where the brain is active and non-active. A lot of the time growing up with my generation, I'm a millennial. uh, ADHD was largely blamed on parents with feeding the kids too much sugar or not paying them enough attention at home. And then with the child, they were seen as children who didn't want to learn, or children who were just bad kids. And we're learning more and more about it now and seeing that it is having to do with the brain and how the brain is able to work and function. With PTSD, this is something that's getting a lot more attention lately. Both PTSD and CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder, and actually TBIs as well, which is traumatic brain injuries, because that can cause all sorts of different PTSD as well. So, the interesting thing that they're kind of seeing with a lot of people with PTSD, especially in soldiers, is that when they are seeing faces, soldiers that are coming back and they're seeing faces, they're seeing a happy face and a neutral face as a face of someone who is angry and wanting to attack. So that's a huge issue that, is happening in people's brains that have PTSD, is that they're not seeing normal reactions or hearing normal sounds as safe sounds or safe faces. So, the same thing goes on with loud bangs. A lot of the time, that can be seen as a very alarming and triggering noise for people with PTSD. For children, I know I still deal with this myself, actually, with yelling and screaming, and even sometimes loud swearing can really be triggering for myself. And I see this a lot of the time with other children too who have grown up in abusive homes, whether that is domestic abuse is happening in the home or they themselves are experiencing abuse in the home, any of those kind of situations. The sound of yelling and screaming, whether it be outside or in the schoolyard or in classrooms or within the home itself, can really enact that fight, flight, or freeze or response in their brain again, which is a lot of the time what happens with PTSD. And they can kind of revert back into themselves and are unsure what to do in that moment, and they automatically go into that fight, flight, or freeze response. And there's so many things that can go into PTSD, and I'm gonna cut myself off there. I'll go on forever with all of these different things. Bipolar disorder, you can see the large difference in the brains here as well. Same with depression. Most notably in depression, people notice um, the feeling of being tired or fatigued, and a lot of people say that, oh, you're just being lazy, but it's really not. It's a chemical reaction in the brain that's really causing you to not have as active as a brain as other people. Your brain is not stimulated in the same way that the average brain is stimulated. Some people are missing the chemical dopamine, other people are missing the chemical citrulline, and there is a few number of people who are missing both as well. And all of those chemicals, or both of those chemicals, they make up for a large portion of what helps stimulate your brain and activates your brain, along with like vitamin D and stuff like that, too, right? So, all of those things account for getting your brain to be active and stimulated enough to give you energy and be able to help you concentrate. So, a large portion of why people with depression feel so fatigued and tired and don't have that motivation is because of this, is because your brain is just not getting all of those kind of reactions that it should. It's very understimulated. So the next one is OCD. This is another one I like to talk about as well because people have so many misconceptions of OCD. So here you can see that the frontal lobe is really, really stimulated here. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that. I don't want to get too much into this because, as someone who had OCD growing up, and I still have tendencies of it, but now I learned how to cope with it. It's very interesting to me because growing up, I wasn't really informed about uh, why I had it or what it was about. I was just kind of told, okay, you have OCD, here's how we're going to deal with it. So, OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. But most people don't know or aren't informed that you do not need to have both obsessions and compulsions to have OCD. There are people that only have obsessions and other people that only have compulsions, and other people that have both obsessions and compulsions that have OCD. So, in the DSM 5, which is what we use to diagnose everyone with mental illness or not, all three of those things fall into the category of OCD. So, for example, me growing up, there was a list of things that kind of fell into the category of how I got diagnosed. And, some of them were with the obsessions, it was that I had to follow certain patterns, I had to walk certain ways, I had to do things in certain orders, and that was the obsessions. So I had to do things in a certain way, or else, I would get panicky and I would get anxious. And, if I didn't, I would have to backtrack and do it again. I would have to start over. With the compulsions, I had to touch things a certain amount of time. I had to touch certain things on my walk. And if I didn't touch certain things while I was walking that way, I had to go back and do it again. I had to have clothes hung in a certain order in my closet and by certain colors and all those kind of things, right? So I had to have things done a certain way. And that was what qualified me of having both obsessions and compulsions. Another thing that's important to kind of note with OCD is that a lot of people that have OCD are also diagnosed with anxiety or panic disorders of some kind because a lot of the time, if you aren't able to kind of cue those obsessions or compulsions or both in your brain, it sets off that kind of internal panic or that internal anxiety, and you feel like something bad is going to happen, which is why a lot of people feel the need to really do those obsessions or compulsions or both. And a lot of people think it's really just about being clean or doing cleaning habits and habitual things that have to do with being clean. For me, I was never really too worried about cleaning things. Like for me with the touching, it would be touching poles on my way as I was walking to school or to work, touching the telephone poles as I walked by them. I would have to touch certain poles to in order to be able to pass by them, right? So, I mean, that for me, I knew they weren't going to be always clean, but I had to touch them. I couldn't tell you why I had to touch them. I just had to touch them. So it's not always about cleanliness or germs, which is a huge misconception with OCD. So this is a scan of a healthy brain, a high risk brain, and a schizophrenic brain. This often I find can cause distress for some people too, or confusion with some people. When it says high risk brain, they often ask me, okay, what's a high risk brain? So a high risk brain in this situation would be a brain with bipolar disorder. That's not saying that everyone that has bipolar disorder is going to have schizophrenia or is going to develop schizophrenia. That's not what it means at all. It just means that you are at higher risk for developing schizophrenia. If you have bipolar disorder, though, do not worry, because people that have schizophrenia in their family or in their family history, they're also at higher risk for developing schizophrenia too. Just like anyone that has mental illness in their family history is at a higher risk of developing mental illness. So that pretty much means everyone around the world is at a higher risk of developing mental illness because everyone at some point in their family history has a history of mental illness. So don't take that as I should be really concerned, or I should worry or I should panic. Don't think about it like that. However, if you do have bipolar disorder or you are in the range of bipolar disorder or personality disorders, it is important to, check in with your local mental health professionals every so often and with your family doctor every so often or your family clinician every so often. Just make sure that you are staying on the right path. And it's also important to remember that you eat healthy and that you maintain a healthy lifestyle. And you try to avoid drinking too much. You definitely avoid doing drugs that include, THC in them or any kind of hallucinogenic drugs. And that you take care of your mental health and that you take care of your physical health as well. So this is a brain, the difference between an average brain and a brain with anxiety disorder as well. You can kind of see the overstimulation that kind of happens with anxiety disorder here. Here we also have a panic disorder brain and an average brain as well. You can see the large difference between the stimulus that's going on in the brain and how it's reacting to a situation. So, what are the most common types of mental health that we are seeing in Canada? So, 1 in 5 Canadians will suffer from a mental illness within the course of a year. So, that's 25% of all Canadians. So, if you take your congregation, obviously you can't line them up right now or look at them all right now, but imagine your congregation. 1 in 5 of them, or 25% of them, in the course of 1 year, will suffer from a mental health challenge. Yet we are not talking about this in our congregations. Why is that? And 1 in 3 will experience a mental health problem in their lifetime. That's 20%. So, majority of our congregations have a larger portion of seniors than they do any other age group right now. So, 20% of our seniors have experienced some kind of mental health issue. But yet, we're not allowing any of them to open up and talk about it, and we're keeping mental health a taboo subject in our congregations when it really shouldn't be, because everyone is affected by mental illness either directly or indirectly in their lifetime. So, if 1 in 5 people are affected by mental illness, and this isn't just a Canadian statistic, this is um, a statistic that can be taken in many different parts of the world. It's also important to realize that 70% of all mental health disorders begin before age 24. And we talked about why this was important before. Because if we are able to intervene with children and youth before the age 24, when their brain is in those ever important developmental years, then we are able to teach them better coping techniques. We are able to help them deal with their mental health challenges better than ever before. We're able to help them better overcome mental illnesses and the long term effects that can come along with a mental illness. So here are some statistics that are in Canada. Now, I will pre-deficit this with saying that these are a little older because I was not able to get the most recent Stats Canada statistics on these before the presentation. But substance use and abuse, these are for teens. The substance use and abuse, or substance abuse and addiction, I should apologize. So 20.6% of teens use opioid pain drugs. 20.5, sorry, 25.1% use cannabis, and 18.1% of teens have used alcohol. So with the cannabis one, I understand many people say to me, well, cannabis is legal now, but this is children and youth that are under 25 that are using cannabis, and this is like a daily use of cannabis. This isn't recreational cannabis, this is daily use of cannabis. So that's kind of important to note too, that this is all children and teens that are under 18 that are somehow getting their hands on cannabis. So that's important to kind of for us to realize too. So depression and anxiety and panic disorder are tied at 8.7% of our population. Eating disorders, I will also say here that these are in gender binaries because there hasn't been any or enough studies done on gender non-binaries and how they affect people with eating disorders. Yet, hopefully, in the near future, we will have some statistics on that. As for the gender binaries, though, 3.7% of females are diagnosed with anorexia, 4.2% of females with bulimia, and anywhere from 5 to 15% of males have anorexia and bulimia, and 40% of males have binge eating disorder, which is a very large amount. Bipolar disorder is about 2.6% of our population, and schizophrenia is 1% of our population. So the harm reduction model, I feel, gets a very bad rep in our society today, and I don't think it should, and I'm going to explain why. So the harm reduction model talks about, rather than completely stopping a harmful activity, which is called abstinence, the harm reduction strategy aims to provide a variety of options that reduces the harms activity to both the people involved in the activity and the community that surrounds them. So, an example of this that often gets a bad rep is the safe injection sites. And I just kind of want to touch on why safe injection sites are a great example of harm reduction and actually benefit both the community and people using them. So, harm reduction sites are actually made to help addicts no longer become addicts. That's their main purpose and use behind them. So, the harm reduction sites, what they do is they have social workers, mental health workers, um, addiction support workers, and doctors that work there all simultaneously, and they're there to help prevent people from overdosing, yes. They're there for needle exchange, yes. Those are all part of harm reduction, but they're also there to teach and inform people about how to reduce their use and how to use safely and how to learn about alcohol and drug addiction and how it affects their bodies and minds. And they also provide things like methadone so that addicts can start weaning off of things like heroin and crack, cocaine, all of those kind of things, right? So it's there to help people work towards getting healthier and safer. And I think a lot of people kind of miss that point when it comes to harm reduction and safe injection sites. But that's really what it's meant for. Another harm reduction strategy that some churches are already doing, some schools are already doing, and I know it's going to sound radical that churches should be doing this or youth groups should be promoting this, but I'm going to put it out there, is providing condoms to youth and providing pads and tampons and all those kind of things to youth and just birth control and feminine hygiene products in general. These are all harm reduction strategies, sorry, in general. Why this is important is because as much as we like to think that everyone that comes to our youth group, especially if your youth group is open to those who don't attend church, as much as we like to think that those who attend our church or attend our youth group um, are going to be abstinent until they're married, that's not always the case. And if we're not open and willing to talk about sex and safe sex and consent and all those kind of things in our church communities, then children and youth in our communities and in our youth groups are going to find ways to learn about it on their own, whether that be through friends, whether that be through porn, whoever that may be. And a lot of the time, teenagers and youth end up having unprotected and unsafe sex because they're too embarrassed to go to the store and buy those items for themselves, or even buy pads and tampons sometimes for themselves, or they just don't simply have the money to do that. So, but by providing those things available in our churches and our schools, it allows teens to have a comfortable, safe space to pick them up in private or pick them up, you know, in a safe environment where they're not going to feel judged and have that protection when they need it. And it's a great harm prevention or harm reduction strategy where we're reducing teen pregnancy rates, we're reducing, um, STD per STDs and STIs and all those kind of things, right? And we're also opening a door for a conversation about safe sex and consent in our communities. So this is another brain scan of different um, brains of drugs and alcohol and how they kind of affect our brains and what um, it does to our brains. One that's really important for teens, obviously, is the smoking and the alcohol. Those are really prevalent things that teens often encounter. One thing that's really important that a lot of people don't really know about is the standardized drink size. I find not only that teens don't really know what, and if adults don't know this, how can they expect their teenagers to know this? For if they're going off to a party in high school and maybe they go with the intent of not to drink, but they end up, having a drink or being pressured into having a drink, or they have one, because of whatever circumstances, right? And if they don't know what a standardized drink size is, or they don't know what binge drinking is considered for their own height and weight and gender, even though right now there's only gender binaries, unfortunately, for standardized drink size. It can be hard for them to understand what is considered to be binge drinking for them and when is too much, right? So it's important to have these discussions and to inform not only yourself, but those in your congregation and those in your youth groups as well. So this is another continuum that we have. This is called the drug and alcohol continuum, and just thinking about where you see yourself. So most of us in our congregations that are adults and of legal drinking age, we see ourselves in the middle here. So only sometimes use, and that would be kind of um, the place where you would want to stop. You never want to go beyond the sometimes use into the problem or dependence. Dependence is where we have, that's where we consider to be an addict or addicted. And if you ever do encounter someone who is in the problem use, that would be where you want to get the first step of intervention and to try and get them help or try and talk to them about getting help or cutting back. We also want to talk about is, especially in this time of like COVID and summer and stuff like that, we often have people, um, I have a lot of people telling me, "Oh, like, I really struggle with when I tell people, 'No, I don't drink,' or 'No, I don't wanna drink,' or even now that marijuana is legal, like, 'No, I don't wanna have, a smoke or an edible,' or whatever it may be," and people questioning them on it. So I think we really need to come to terms with allowing people, or allowing ourselves and others to be okay with being on that not using side of this scale, whether they be 19 or 20, or whether they be 45, 50, 60 years old. Further explanation, I think it's important that we understand that no is a full and complete sentence and that it doesn't need an explanation. If someone says, "No, I don't feel like having a drink," or "No, I don't drink," offer them something else or continue on with the conversation, right? Alcohol doesn't need to be involved in everyone's life. It doesn't need to be part of every social gathering that we are in. And it should just be able to be, okay, that's okay, let's move on. So I think it's important for us to kind of bring that up in social circles that we may be a part of. That isn't, no, I'm okay, I don't want to drink, or no, I'm okay, I don't want any, smoke or whatever. That it just is a complete sentence and that it's okay, and to carry on with the conversation. So, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. For those congregations that do not yet have a mental health Sunday or a mental health week to kind of promote mental health and wellness in their congregation, maybe this could be a good time for you to kind of say, hey, let's start off by, acknowledging Mental Health Awareness Month. um, May is, obviously not the end all to be all to people with mental illness, but it's a great month that acknowledges Mental Health Awareness Month. So there could be some time dedicated to mental health within May. So, what is stigma and the impact of stigma? So, stigma is a mark of disgrace or stereotype that is placed on a person to kind of set them apart from the rest of society or their community. It's often negative and has negative attitudes and discrimination awards towards it. People with mental illness, when they have stigma placed on them, it often leads them to suffer in silence, leaving them with blame, shame, hopelessness, and loneliness. They feel like they can't open up about their mental health and illness because of that embarrassment or shame around those feelings that they are having. There's also a lot of stigma around the LGBTQ2S plus people of faith communities. So there's still a lot of fear and lack of acceptance in many faith communities, and that can have a large impact on people's mental health. So some statistics I have here. These ones are recent. They are from June 2020. So as of June 2020, 1.7% of Canadians between 18 and 55 identified as being gay or lesbian, and 1.3 identified as being bisexual. On top of that, 0.9% of all couples in Canada are same gender couples. So that's a large portion of Canada that we're kind of pushing away or pushing out if we're not learning to be kind of accepting of the LGBTQ2S plus communities and of their struggles, both with acceptance at large in faith communities and with their mental health issues that they have been dealing with. It's also important to note that approximately 1 in every 2,000 births are intersex births. So 1 in every 2,000 people are born intersex. And that number is really important for us to remember because we think that, 1 in every 10,000 people are born with, such and such an illness. And we're like, wow, that doesn't seem like you know, a lot of people. I thought the number would be much higher than that. And, we're shocked when we hear, a number like 1 in 10,000. And, now we're hearing 1 in every 2,000 births are intersex. So that's really something that we have to kind of learn to talk about too, because they are part of this LGBTQ2S plus community as well. And for many, many years, um, these children were being operated on before they even had a chance to kind of say what they were feeling or had a chance to kind of decide on who they were as a person. So it's really important that we acknowledge their mental and emotional health as well, when it comes to their feelings and emotions and their aspect of faith and how they feel with the way they were born or the way things were decided for them. So, due to stigma, 49% of people decided not to get help. So, what is the impact on youth in Canada? So, mental illness is the second highest reason for hospitalization in Canada, only behind injuries. Canada's youth suicide rate is the third highest in the industrialized world. So on that part, I feel like Canada, we are really, really far behind in how we are dealing with suicide prevention and intervention, along with mental health awareness. So a little bit of that fact right there is that it's estimated that 15% of Canadian youth have engaged in deliberate self injury, also known as self harm. So a lot of people ask me, kind of like, why is that? And my answer to that is it's fairly complex, but it can come with the feelings to want to relieve anxiety or depression or a feeling of numbness even. So they're harming themselves to try and feel something, or deal with feelings of anger or a feeling of a loss of control. So they're trying to regain control over their bodies. There's many, many more other emotions that are kind of used to deal with that. And it's important to realize that there have been cases reported as young as 6 years old with people doing deliberate self harm. So, I mean, we're talking about kids in Sunday school doing acts of deliberate self harm. So, it's really important that we address all these emotions with our children and youth, so that we can prevent suicide and we can prevent deliberate self-harm. And a lot of the time parents say to me, "Oh, well, my kids don't have access to anything sharp. They couldn't do self-harm." And I think that's because there's been a large talk about self-harm only being cutting oneself, but this can also be self-choking. This can be biting oneself. This can be scratching. This can be pulling one's hair. This could be, hitting themselves against a wall in order to break bones or bruise themselves. There's so many different aspects of deliberate self-harm that I don't even have time to get into all of them today. And it's easy to hide for a lot of teens and young children as well. Um, Untreated mental illness can also lead to lower marks in school and can cause self-isolating behavior, which can then in turn to these self-deliberate injuries as well. However, once diagnosed with a mental illness, 80% of youth do find relief and help with their symptoms. So, what does all this have to do with faith and our mental health? So, these are some questions that you can take and ask your congregation, ask your board members, have an open and honest discussion with your faith community. So, is mental health talked about in your church? If you're watching this with your congregation or with your board, please feel free to stop me or pause this video and have a conversation right now. Does your church have access to mental health resources or services that are available in your area? How is mental health viewed in your church? Does your church have a mental health Sunday? Does your church have an affirming view? And by this, I don't just mean, is it accepting of the LGBTQ2S plus community? Is it accepting of those with disabilities? Is it accepting of those with different mental health disabilities? Is it accepting of the Black Lives Matter movement? Is it accepting of Indigenous communities? Is it welcoming to those who live in poverty and may need an extra hand? All of these things are part of the affirming movement. The United Church of Canada has a newly formed mental health and wellness committee, as I mentioned before, and we have a list of resources, an extensive list of resources that's relating to mental health, trauma, the LGBTQ plus community, and more. This is actually my role on the mental health and wellness committee. Is I'm in charge of collecting and collaborating on different resources that are available, that we are going to be making available to all of you, hopefully sooner rather than later. There is some COVID-19 available resources right now that are available on the United Church of Canada website, and there should be resources that have been emailed to all of you through your regional councils as well. So, having faith does not mean that you cannot suffer from mental illness. Loving God does not mean that you will not lead a stress, does not mean that you will lead a stress free life. Some biblical examples of people who dealt with mental health and had faith are Job. Job is a wonderful example. Moses, Jonah, David, Jeremiah, Jesus, even. One of our all time favorite guys in the Bible, Joseph and Sarah. Can you think of others who struggled with their faith in aspects of mental health? And try not to use Google, but this is a great challenge that you can do with your church. So here are just some closing statements that I have. So this is the stages of change model. It's important to know that people can come in and out of these stages at any point, and that relapse is something that can happen at any point in here, and does happen for many, many people. And this maintenance point here is kind of what I was talking about before when we were talking about the continuum of mental health, and that maintenance is something that you constantly have to work on um, in recovery, because recovery is a continuing process. It's not just something that you can say, oh, I'm done now. I've, worked on, my recovery and that's it, I'm done. Recovery is a constant battle for some people. And in order to stay in recovery, you have to work on that maintenance piece. So that's something that's important to realize and work with as well. So this is talking about trauma-informed approach and a strength-based approach, going from the approach of what is wrong with you to what has happened to you, right? And talking about changing that perspective of being attention-seeking to looking at the individual as, how is this person trying to connect with me or with themselves or with their emotions in the best way that they know how. Self-harm and self-injury for a long time was seen as attention-seeking behavior, and that made people feel worse about it. So now we're really trying to understand it from a trauma-informed approach of seeing people as they're doing this because it's the only way they often know how to cope with their emotions or know how to connect with their body sometimes, if they're in that constant state of feeling numb or they don't feel like they have control over their body. Same with eating disorders. It's a way for them to feel in control of their body again, or in control of their lives in one way or another. There is a whole list of more perspectives and words of how to transform them into a trauma-informed and strength-based approach. If you would like more, please let me know, and I can always email you another list. This is cultural trauma. So what is cultural trauma? This occurs when the community has been subject to a collective trauma. An example of this is the Aboriginal communities right now and what they have been going through for a long time since we have colonized this land. I'm using the term we as I am a white person. I'm a white colonizer to this land. Race-based trauma occurs when there has been an emotional and psychological trauma, or this could be physical trauma as well, as a result of one or more forms of race-based trauma. The LGBTQ2S plus based trauma occurs when there has been an emotional and psychological trauma as a result, or physical trauma, as a result of discrimination and hostile attitudes based on someone being part of the LGBTQ2S plus community. So the basics of ACEs, I kind of explained what ACEs was before. So it stands for Adverse Childhood Experience Events. So these are events that happen in a child's developmental years and can affect them all the way into their adulthood. So there are three kind of basic types of ACEs. So these are abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Abuse can include anything from physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. Neglect can include physical and or emotional. And household dysfunction is again a large range of things. So it can include a caregiver's incapacity. So that can include a caregiver having their own mental illness or substance abuse issues, partner violence, which is domestic violence, divorce, and even having a family member that has been incarcerated. And there's many, many different outcomes that can be involved here, including mental illness, but also other health risks that are involved in this too. Um, any of these posters, if you would like them, by the way, I have access to all of them because I've made all of them either for Youth Mental Health Canada or for the business that or the private practice that I co own, which is Georgetown Community Outreach. So I can send you all of these posters as well. So, sensory processing disorder is something that we don't often think about. It's part of autism spectrum disorder. And all of these things are important to kind of take into account when we have someone in our church congregation that has autism spectrum disorder or even anxiety disorders or PTSD. So things like having really bright lights and really loud noises or just an overstimulation. I know for myself, I can get really overstimulated by having just too many things happening all at once. So, having super bright lights and a lot of loud noises and a lot of people around me can be really, really overstimulating and can cause me to have different events or different reactions, sorry, based on what's going on in my life at the time. Sometimes it's panic attacks, sometimes I get angry. It really depends on what's going on, but it's important that we recognize all of these things. So boundaries are really important to set not only for yourself but for others. Something I like to do with the youth that come into my space are that I ask them to write out kind of their own covenant of boundaries that they have for themselves so that we don't accidentally violate those boundaries. So if someone doesn't like to be touched, I want them to write that on their own personal covenant to hang on the wall and let other people know. This can be done, I do it in a group therapy setting sometimes, I do it in classrooms sometimes, but it can also be done in a youth group setting to let other people know these are my boundaries, these are what I have, these are what I ask. They can include their pronouns and chosen name or given name on here as well. But boundaries are really important for people to kind of know and understand when you have them for other people, but also to set them for yourself. So someone did ask me about de-escalation tips. So these are my top 10 de-escalation tips that I've kind of learned from doing my nonviolent crisis intervener courses and certification. So the first one is obviously to be empathetic and non-judgmental. No one wants to come into a situation and feel like they're being judged. The second one is super important, and it goes with boundaries. It's respecting personal space. Never go inside someone's bubble or touch someone without asking them because that can just set off their emotions and trigger them even more than they already were when they came into that situation. So I know a lot of people's first reaction when someone comes in crisis or they're crying is to go over and reach out and touch them or hug them or do something like that. But it's really important that before you do that, you always ask if it is okay to do that because if someone's coming in and they have been physically violated in any way, that can really trigger something. So we always want to be respectful of people's personal space and take them somewhere private and ask them before we touch them. It's also important to use non threatening nonverbal cues. So, one of my favorite things to do, especially when I'm working with children, is to get us to sit down together so that I'm on the same level as them and I'm not standing above them. Sometimes when I work with youth, youth are taller than me. So, it's also important that because I'm only short. I'm 5 foot, so a lot of youth are taller than me, and I don't want them to feel that we're on a different level in any sort of way too. So it's important that we sit down together and that we're on the same level. Sometimes people do like pacing around. So if that's the case there, then I will sit down on top of a chair, on top of a desk, or wherever it may be, just so that I'm in a non-threatening position in my body position as well. So it's important to not cross your arms or anything like that, even though that can be a habit for some people. And have an open posture, just so that you're as non-threatening as possible. And keep your emotions in check and stay calm. The minute your emotions up and you go into that panic mode, that person is going to recognize that right away and their panic's going to go up as well. So keep your emotions in check as best you can and focus on their feelings. This isn't just, emotional feelings. This can be like, what are you feeling right now? How are your hands and toes feeling? Can you feel them? Let's focus on grounding ourselves right now. If you need tips and tricks on grounding techniques, you can feel free to email me, and I will definitely give you a list of really helpful grounding techniques for crisis situations or for anxiety and panic. And I can, touch base with you there. It's also important to ignore challenging questions of authority. So if they're kind of challenging your authority, like asking you who you are to kind of help them or talk to them or whatever it may be, ignore it, move past it, move on to another question. Don't rebuttal them because you're just going to get into a constant battle with them, and that's not what you need in that situation. So ignore those questions and move on to a next one. The next one you want to make sure that you can do is set limits both for yourself and others. So know that if there's a certain situation that may come up that is triggering for yourself, that you can let other people know that, hey, you need to step in, you need to intervene here. Or, if they leave this room, I'm going to need so and so to kind of step in and help me out. Or if they mention XYZ, we need to make sure that this person or this person is informed. Or if you decide to leave here today and it is safe for you to leave here, like I don't feel that you're at a threat to yourself or others, then I need you to sign this suicide safety um, card with me, or this form, which I can also provide all of you if you would like one. I have a suicide safety form that I use with clients, both at my personal practice and in other practices that I have worked with in the past as well. And it's just a safety contract basically that you go over with them, ensuring that they will reach out to someone if they're feeling that they are in distress, or if they feel like harming themselves or someone else, or any of those kind of things, right? So making sure you set those limits. And then with that goes in choosing what you insist upon, right? So choosing to tell them that before you leave here tonight, I need you to sign off on this documentation and this documentation. And I need you to assure me that you're going to call me when you get to this destination. Or I need you to assure me that you're going to call me in the morning and make sure that, you do a check-in with me. Or you're going to call your therapist or counselor or whoever it may be and make sure that you check in with them as well. Um, or letting them know that if you're under the age of, in Ontario it's 16, and you have harmed yourself, that I need to contact your parent. um, or letting them know that there are certain situations where if there has been abuse reported, or those three main things: the abuse, harm to self, harm to others, any of those kind of things that you are mandated to report, that they know that there will be a report made, whether they like that or not. Those There are some things that by law they need to be reported, and that documentation is made, right? So the documentation, sometimes like the suicide safety report can stay just between the two of you and whoever else may be your supervisor or on that kind of board that oversees you. It can stay between those kind of people. It's kept confidential, but it does need to be signed. Another thing is to allow for silent reflection. Don't expect people to answer you right away. Don't expect there to be, just 10 seconds of silence. Allow for, 30 seconds to a minute of silent reflection when you're asking questions. And then, same with time for decision making. So, if you're asking someone if they want to be checked into a hospital or go to Emerge or go see a therapist or a counselor or stay the night at a friend's house or someone in the congregation's house or something of that sort, don't expect them to answer right away. Allow time for a decision, and that can take 10, 15 minutes sometimes, and that's okay. Things don't need to be answered right away. My top 10 tips for de-escalation. So these are some self-care ideas. I'm not going to run through them all. You can always pause if you would like to read them all, but they're basically broken down into 5 categories. So it's physical, mental and emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and social. So here are some free services that we offer with youth mental health. So there's the daily message of support, which will be sent to your inbox every single day with just cute little short, inspirational, funny messages just to kind of boost your spirits, put a smile on your face, and get you through the day a little easier. These are free. You can go to ymhc.ngo/DSM or just ymhc.ngo to sign up for that one. And the other one that we offer is called the Compassion Card Service, also by YMHC. It's part of our peer support service. It's also free. And this one's a little more personalized, so you can kind of send us a little personal message and tell us, why you are looking for that support, what's going on in your life, and then we'll give you kind of a more personalized response. So I respond to quite a few of these, and you kind of just tell us what you're going through, and then we'll kind of just send you a little short message and respond to what you've said to us, and then you get a little card in your inbox and it's a little digital card in your inbox with a personalized message and a fun little picture on the front as well. So that's kind of all I have for you today on this subject. If you would like more information on mental health and those kind of things, youth mental health especially, um, I am doing a free workshop with Youth Mental Health Canada on substance use and abuse on Tuesday, August 18th at 7 p.m. till 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can go to the Youth Mental Health Canada Facebook page and sign up today, or you can find our event on eventbrite.com. So you can go there if you would like more information and to see another free workshop by me, and I have a partner who's going to be helping me out as well. So that is it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had an amazing time at Rendezvous, and I hope to see you all in another couple of years. Bye, everyone.